Peru still without a president. The effects of the great data center race on Latin America, and scandals challenge Milei in Buenos Aires. Welcome to Weekend Sentinel from Latin America Risk Sentinel.com. Thanks for being with me today. In Weekend Sentinel, we look back at some of the top issues from the week in Latin America. Latin America Risk Sentinel at LatinAmericaRiskSentinel.com helps you turn risk into opportunity. I'm Winn Trivette II, your Latin America regional specialist. Be sure to start your day with the Morning Latam Signal email for the one big story you can't afford to miss. Simply visit bit.ly/daily and the letter B. Consider Weekend Sentinel your weekend readout before the Monday morning meetings. So we start with Peru. Peru remains without a confirmed president after the June 7th runoff between Keiko Fujimori and Roberto Sánchez. With more than 98% of the actives counted, early results show now Keiko Fujimori slightly ahead of her challenger with over half of the vote, but by only a scant margin of 4,000 votes. The national tally masks a near-perfect geographic split. Fujimori leads in Lima, parts of the coast, and, importantly, outside of Peru, while Sanchez dominates the interior and the rural south. Sanchez has shifted from urging respect for the count to warning about attempts to distort it, a move that increases the likelihood of legal challenges and public pressure as long as the margins stay narrow. The central issue is no longer the vote count itself, but the legitimacy of the process and the governability of whoever emerges. Peru's institutions now face two simultaneous tests. Will the losing side accept the result once the final actas are certified? And can the winner govern with a fragmented political landscape? If Fujimori ultimately prevails, her party's congressional presence could give her more leverage than recent presidents. However, if Sanchez wins, that same Congress could become his first constraint. The risk is not immediate instability, but a prolonged period of contested narratives, legal filings, and pressure on electoral authorities. Investors and lenders should monitor the timeline for certification, the tone of post-election statements, and early signs of congressional alignment or obstruction. Companies with regulatory exposure in Peru, like mining, energy, and infrastructure, should be aware of any permitting changes or congressional oversight. Latin America Risk Sentinel expects a slow resolution, and Sanchez not accepting a vote, which could lead to more economic, political, and social paralysis in Latin America's sixth largest economy. Data centers. The global scramble to build data centers has become a competition for computing power and strategic leverage. The U.S. remains the dominant hub, with 5,300 data centers, more than the next 10 countries combined, and $471 billion in private AI investment since 2013. China follows in number 2 at $219 billion in AI investment and a state-directed push to expand domestic computing power and reduce reliance on foreign technology. India is now one of the world's largest growing data center markets, driven by rapid digitization and a domestic consumer base exceeding 1.4 billion people. And Latin America? Well, it's led by Brazil as an emerging state with strategic extension, not a peripheral participant by any means. Why does this matter? Computing capacity is becoming as strategically important in the AI era as oil, industrial capacity, and ports were in earlier eras. The distribution of data centers shapes AI training and inference capacity, cloud resiliency and latency, and energy demand and grid planning. The effects on Latin America in the great data center race are the following. First, Brazil already hosts over 100 data centers, the largest footprint in the region, and is attracting hyperscale investment from both Chinese and U.S. cloud providers. Chile's energy intensive copper sector and stable grid make it a natural AI infrastructure node. Mexico's proximity to U.S. supply chains and its role in semiconductor adjacent manufacturing are pulling computing demand northward, while Colombia, Peru, and Argentina are competing for secondary hubs tied to energy availability, fiber routes, and regulatory stability. The region's advantage is structural: abundant renewable energy, growing digital markets, and strategic geography between the U.S. and Asia. Investment funds should care for the evaluation of digital infrastructure plays, energy assets, and hyperscale expansion. And also, energy companies should be alert for the rising demand for compute intensive workloads. In the judgment of Latin America Risk Sentinel, computing demand will outpace grid capacity. Brazil, Chile, and Mexico will face pressure to expand transmission lines, renewable generation, and permitting frameworks. Foreign investment is likely to accelerate. That is, U.S. and Chinese cloud providers will deepen their presence in Brazil and Mexico as part of a broader strategic competition. Latin America is not just a participant in the global data center scramble, it is becoming a strategic hinge between U.S. computing dominance, Chinese digital influence, and global energy infrastructure demand. And finally, Argentina. Why the Adorni case is a direct challenge to Presidente Milei. The growing financial scandal around Presidente Milei's own cabinet chief and chief public defender, Manuel Adorni, has cast a shadow over the administration in La Casa Rosada. Prosecutor Gerardo Polosita is weighing whether to expand the illicit enrichment investigation into Adorni's financial affairs. Adorni has been silenced by the scandals after weeks of reduced public appearances. His drop in visibility has only amplified questions about his finances and business ties. It highlights the high political cost of having the government's most public communicator under scrutiny. Adorni has already admitted to tax fraud and promised to pay back to Treasury, related to undeclared income from his wife's coaching company, Mas Bay. He sought to turn the page by paying the tax debt, but prosecutors are still examining whether the undeclared income intersects with state-linked clients. A second investigation into his brother, Provincial Deputy Francisco Adorni, is also active. Both cases involve corrected filings, unexplained valuations, and pending confidential annexes. This is not a peripheral scandal. It is a direct political challenge to Presidente Milei, because Adorni is not just some mid-level official. He's the daily public face of the administration. Any credibility issue around him becomes a credibility issue around the government's message, its discipline, and internal controls. The political cost is evident. A spokesperson under investigation weakens the president's ability to control the narrative. So political actors inside the administration should be alert, because Adorni's vulnerability becomes a strategic liability for Milei's communication strategy. And the opposition, who will no doubt use the Adorni case to question the government's anti-corruption posture. It's likely that political pressure will only increase inside La Casa Rosada as the case widens and the investigations continue. And a communications vacuum probably will persist as well, especially if this chief spokesperson for the administration is forced to focus on scandal and not the message of President Milei. Latin America Risk Sentinel sees the stain of scandal growing, and a question will also continue to increase as well about how Presidente Milei can keep his chief communicator in place while prosecutors examine unexplained wealth, corrected filings, and business ties connected to the administration. That's your Weekend Sentinel. So before Monday morning, watch out for any updates to the Peru presidential election count and the expected challenges. Given AI's increasing part of our lives and resistance to building data centers in developed parts of the world, expect greater interest in Latin America, an opportunity for investors in the region. And in Buenos Aires, La Casa Rosada will likely find it difficult to communicate its news to its voters and investors, as scandal shows no sign of lessening. Thanks for being with me today. Latin America Risk Sentinel at latinamericarissentinel.com helps you turn risk into opportunity. Be sure to start your day with the Morning Latam signal every weekday for the one big story emailed to you that you cannot afford to miss. Simply visit bit.ly/daily and the letter B. I'm Winn Trivette II, your Latin America Regional Specialist.